They left. Or so we thought. They told the world it was for freedom, for privacy, for peace. They said they had no choice. That the institution was suffocating. That life in the royal family had become unbearable. But now, after multi-million-dollar deals, Netflix specials, primetime interviews, podcast launches, and a flurry of headlines that rewrote royal history, they're coming back. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. Why? It's a question that feels too big, too sharp to answer with anything neat. And yet, it's the question now echoing through the halls of Windsor, whispered in Downing Street, and debated in every newsroom from London to Los Angeles. Because just when the dust had begun to settle, just when the monarchy, for better or worse, seemed to be moving forward, Meghan and Harry have reportedly set their sights back on the very institution they walked away from. And they're not just dropping by. If the reports are true, and trust me, not all of them are, they want back in. Not fully, not publicly, not yet. But the signals are there, layered under polite words and sudden visits, private phone calls and vanishing appearances. Something's shifting. Something no one, not even their fiercest critics, thought would happen so soon. But here's the more unsettling part. What if this was the plan all along? Part 2. Middle, build-up, and analysis. Let's slow this down. Strip it to the bone. For 3 years, the Duke and Duchess of Sussex built a life far from the palace walls. A $14 million Montecito estate. A partnership with Netflix reportedly worth $100 million. Podcasts. Philanthropy. Children's books. Vogue covers. A memoir. Spare. That gutted what little royal mystique remained. And beneath it all, a running narrative that they were free. Finally, utterly free. And yet, that narrative started to fray. It didn't begin with one single moment. It never does. But somewhere between archetypes flopping and Spotify cutting ties, somewhere between those blunt revelations in Endgame and a growing silence from Hollywood, something cracked. The optics shifted. Where once they were hailed as survivors of an archaic institution, they began to resemble something else entirely. Players without a stage, protagonists without a plot, navigating an industry that thrives on mystery, while oversharing became their only currency. Netflix had invested heavily. So had Spotify. So had fans. But the content dried up. The headlines grew colder. The invitations stopped coming. And when Tyler Perry, once their champion, quietly distanced himself, that wasn't a ripple. That was a rift. Then came the optics nobody wanted to talk about. Red carpets that never came. Projects delayed. Paparazzi shots that felt oddly timed. And finally, the murmur. A return to the UK? It started as rumor. Then as satire. And then, like all royal stories, it slowly took on shape. Texture. Leaks. Whispered confirmations. Suddenly, Harry was back in Britain, alone. No press. No fanfare. A visit to his father. Or was it a plea? Suddenly, Meghan was considering a royal role, not out of want, but necessity. The US, it seemed, had cooled. The platform was burning out. And something, or someone, had opened a door back home. Why? Part 3. Strategic framing and teases. This isn't just a celebrity couple repositioning after a failed brand. This is a potential reverse Megxit. An unthinkable re-entanglement with the very monarchy they claimed destroyed them. And that brings up something darker. What if the exit was never designed to be permanent? What if stepping away was always part of a longer game? Not revenge, not redemption, reinvention. If that's true, if even a sliver of that is true, then what we're witnessing isn't just a comeback. It's a test of the monarchy's immune system. Can the institution that survived abdication, scandal, and death survive this? And what's at stake if it can't? Because make no mistake, this won't be a quiet re-entry. There are forces on both sides of the Atlantic, media, government, royal courtiers, watching closely. Some are working to facilitate a return. Others are working just as hard to block it. And then there's the public. Do we want them back? Do we trust them? Do we even believe them anymore? These aren't rhetorical questions. These are the questions now haunting every senior royal, every government aide, every palace press secretary who remembers the fallout of that Oprah interview. There's talk of intervention, not just emotional, political, legal, strategic. Because if Meghan and Harry do return, even part-time, it won't just be controversial. It could reshape how the monarchy operates, or if it survives at all. Now, let's be clear. This expose isn't about rehashing old scandals. This is about what's unfolding right now, behind the headlines, behind the public smiles, behind the sudden silences. This is about why, after everything, the Sussexes may be returning, and what the royal family plans to do about it. Because someone is making calls, someone has reopened negotiations, and someone, high enough to make it matter, has decided that the time is right. But here's the kicker. Not everyone inside the palace agrees. One senior royal is already blocking the path. Another? They may be preparing to resign if it goes forward. This isn't a reunion. It's a reckoning. And we're going to take you inside it, piece by piece. From secret calls and royal meetings to media leaks and shifting alliances, this is the story behind the story. The hidden playbook, the slow U-turn, and the question no one dares ask out loud. What happens if they come back and never leave again? Part 4. End. Mini cliffhanger. Coming up next, we expose the quiet collapse of Meghan and Harry's American empire, how Netflix turned its back, how insiders leaked details of a tense confrontation, and how a single missed phone call from Los Angeles may have triggered the chain reaction that led them here. Because if you thought Hollywood dropped them because of drama, wait until you hear who really pulled the plug. Let's start with the silence. Not the public silence. That's easy to ignore. A vanished Instagram post, a missed red carpet appearance, a canceled podcast. You can write that off as strategy, privacy, timing. No, the real silence came behind the scenes. Quiet calls that went unanswered, emails that bounced to assistants, projects that went into development and somehow never came back. It didn't happen overnight. The spotlight doesn't just flicker off in Hollywood. It dims slowly until one day, you realize the phone isn't ringing anymore. And for Meghan and Harry, that moment arrived months ago. Quietly, awkwardly, like a guest at a party who suddenly realizes no one's laughing at their jokes anymore. And worse, no one's even listening. But what changed? They were the couple who could do no wrong. The fresh voice, the modern royals, survivors, activists. The Netflix deal alone sparked headlines around the world. Sussexes land $100 million contract. And for a while, it worked. Harry and Meghan was one of the platform's biggest documentary rollouts that quarter. Critics might have scoffed at the narrative, but audiences tuned in. Millions did. And say what you want about their version of events, people were watching. Then came the podcast. Meghan's Archetypes, promised as a searing examination of labels, identity, womanhood. Spotify had invested, promoted, pushed. But here's the part no one expected. People didn't stay. They showed up. Out of curiosity, out of loyalty, maybe even out of empathy. But by episode 4, listener drop-off was steep. And by episode 8, Spotify had a problem. It wasn't just about content. It was about tone, message, authenticity. Behind the scenes, producers began to talk. One described the show as curated empathy with no soul. Another, bluntly, it was branding, not broadcasting. Still, none of this would have mattered. Not really, if the numbers justified the noise. But they didn't. And for Spotify, a business built on ruthless metrics, that was the end of the conversation. Then came the call. It was short, professional, brutal. They were out. No renewal. No expansion. No second season. And for the first time since Megxit, the Sussexes were forced to confront a version of themselves they hadn't yet met. Not essential. Pause. It's not that Meghan and Harry weren't still powerful. They are. In some ways, even more so now. Because controversy, as we all know, drives attention. But Hollywood doesn't run on sympathy. It runs on return. And that's where the cracks began to show. Because Netflix had questions, too. The $100 million deal was inked with promises, documentaries, scripted content, children's shows, maybe even a drama. But as of today, nearly 4 years later, only one major project released. One. And behind closed doors, executives were beginning to wonder, were they partners or liabilities? Then came the leak. A source within the Netflix development wing whispered to the Wrap, quietly, off record, that the Sussexes didn't understand the production pipeline and expected success from access alone. Was it true? Maybe. Maybe not. But in this town, perception is reality. And when the industry starts to shift its tone, when whispers turn into shrugs, momentum dies fast. Suddenly, Meghan was being left off guest lists. Harry was being booked for speeches, but not interviews. Archewell's press releases slowed. The Archetypes production team was disbanded. And Meghan, for all her instincts, did something uncharacteristic. She went quiet. Completely quiet. No interviews. No paparazzi smiles. Not even a Vogue profile. And in Hollywood, that silence doesn't suggest mystery. It suggests trouble. Midway, audience reflection and emotional tone shift. Now, let's be honest. It's easy to mock celebrity downfall. There's something oddly comforting about watching the famous stumble, especially those who seem to defy the rules of fame in the first place. But this isn't schadenfreude. This is about what happens when the platform that lifted you, the media, the audience, the system, no longer sees the value in your story. And for Meghan, whose entire life in the post-royal chapter was built around message, that's more than professional. It's existential. Here was a woman who went from palace prisoner to global phenomenon, who told Oprah and the world her truth, raw and unsparing. And yet, just 2 years later, that same world had moved on. Because vulnerability, without growth, becomes narrative fatigue. And that's the contradiction no one on her team wanted to say out loud. The story had stalled. And without a new chapter, a new antagonist, a new victory, the public started to ask, what exactly are we watching for? Then came the moment that changed everything. It wasn't a press release. It wasn't a headline. It was a meeting, one that never should have leaked. But it did. And what was said in that room may have started the path back to Britain. Narrative build toward cliffhanger. Here's what we know. In early spring, inside a discreet conference room just off Sunset Boulevard, Meghan met with a team of branding advisors. Not her usual PR team. Not Archewell staff. This was something else. Smaller. Sharper. Crisis management specialists. According to an internal leak, verified by 2 separate insiders, the meeting wasn't about content. It was about strategy, repositioning, re-entry, image resurrection. And the suggestion, the one that reportedly silenced the room, was this. You need a second act. And you're not going to find it in California. Pause. At first, Meghan resisted. She had worked too hard to leave that life behind. The restrictions, the surveillance, the pain. Going back, even temporarily, it felt like defeat. But one advisor, a former White House media consultant, put it plainly. You left as the victim. You need to return as the leader. And that line, that framing, reportedly changed everything. Because what if returning wasn't failure? What if it was control? Not permanently, not to move back, but to reclaim the narrative, to disrupt it. That's how this started. Not with desperation, but with a recalibration. And once that idea landed, that maybe, just maybe, going back could be the power move, things moved quickly. Calls were made. Private ones. Through back channels. Not to courtiers. Not to press officers. To blood. And that's when Harry got involved. Because while Meghan was planning an optics return, Harry had already picked up the phone. To someone he hadn't spoken to, not directly, in almost 9 months. His father. Lead into final segment before cliffhanger. But before we get to that call, and the chain reaction it sparked, there's one final beat you need to know. The Hollywood industry, the one that once celebrated them, didn't just fade away. It turned hard. Within weeks of that crisis branding session, an internal Netflix document surfaced. It wasn't public, but it was damning. It ranked current talent partnerships by long-term value forecast. The Sussexes? They were downgraded to Tier 3. Translation? No green lights without oversight. No budgets without executive approval. And perhaps worst of all, no priority. That same week, the Archewell Productions office reportedly went dark. Staff were told to work remote indefinitely. One producer, who had moved across the country for the job, found out via Slack message that her contract wouldn't be renewed. The empire had cracked. And that's when Harry made the call. Late. Unannounced. Not to negotiate. Not to apologize. But to ask one very specific question. Is there still a way back? What followed was not what he expected. Because on the other end of the line, King Charles didn't hang up. He listened. He paused. And then, he said something that stopped Harry cold. Something only a father, or a monarch, would dare to say. But we'll get to that. because someone else was listening. And she had no intention of letting this return go forward without a fight. The call didn't come during daylight. It rarely does when someone already knows the answer might hurt. It came late, past protocol, past advisors, past the carefully constructed lanes that keep the royal family functioning without friction. And that alone tells you something. When Prince Harry reached for the phone, he wasn't calling as a duke. He wasn't calling as a brand. He was calling as a son who had run out of options and realized, perhaps too late, that the last door still open was the one he'd slammed hardest. Here's the part most people miss. Harry didn't call Clarence's house to negotiate terms. Not at first. He didn't lead with security, titles, or appearances. He didn't bring lawyers or aides into the conversation. He didn't even mention Meghan's name right away. He asked a question, a small one, almost fragile. Are you well? That's what multiple sources, independent of each other, say was the opening line. And if that's true, then everything that followed makes a little more sense. Because this wasn't a strategy call. Not yet. It was something messier. Something older. The kind of call you make when you realize the world you chose hasn't turned out the way you promised yourself it would. King Charles, by all accounts, hesitated before answering. Not because he didn't know what to say, but because he did. He knew this call wouldn't end cleanly. He knew it wouldn't be the last. And he knew that once he engaged, he'd be pulled back into a conflict he'd spent years trying to manage from a distance. So he didn't rush it. He spoke carefully, slowly, asked about the children, asked about Harry's health, asked nothing about Meghan. Not at first. And that omission? That wasn't accidental. Because this conversation, whatever else it was not meant to be a joint appeal. It was Harry's alone. And for the first time since Megxit, that mattered. Now, here's where the story starts to bend. Harry didn't ask to come home. He asked whether it would ever be possible. That distinction matters more than you might think. Because possibility leaves room for dignity. It leaves room for timing. It leaves room for the kind of conditional hope that doesn't sound like defeat. And Charles, according to one palace-adjacent source, didn't shut it down. He didn't say yes. He didn't say no. He said something far more dangerous. Everything has consequences. It's the sort of answer that sounds like a warning, until you realize it's also an invitation. The call lasted less than 20 minutes. No commitments. No follow-up scheduled. No mention of dates or duties. And yet, within 48 hours, 3 separate things happened that raised eyebrows inside royal circles. First, a senior private secretary quietly reached out to a legal advisor previously involved in Harry's security appeals. Second, a long-shelved briefing document titled Limited Reintroduction Scenarios was reopened and circulated internally. And third, this one matters, Princess and was informed. Not consulted, informed, which tells you the decision-making had already begun. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. Because back in California, Meghan did not hear about the call immediately. Harry didn't tell her that night. He waited. Why? Some say he needed to process it. Others say he feared her reaction. But there's another possibility, one that fits the pattern we've been watching for months. Harry, for once, was acting alone. Not because he was trying to deceive her, but because he wanted to know, before anyone else influenced the answer, whether there was still a place for him. And that desire, that's the crack where everything else poured in. When Meghan did find out, the response wasn't explosive. Not outwardly. No shouting. No ultimatums. Just a long silence that people close to them later described as calculating. Because Meghan understood something Harry didn't. A return is never just a return. It's a negotiation. And negotiations require leverage. So while Harry was processing his father's words, Meghan was already thinking 3 moves ahead. Who controls the optics? Who frames the narrative? Who benefits first? And more importantly, who loses? This is where the story splits.